I'm the math support person at the University of Glasgow, and a few years ago, a couple of colleagues and I decided to try out using Facebook groups. So what we've been doing is that we thought that it all started with using Facebook groups for providing academic support. And what happened is that the retention officer was my colleague Lorna, who doesn't actually work with us anymore, but one of her tasks was to implement peer-assisted learning for first-year maths and computing science students. And despite the fact that the sessions were very popular and there was a demand for them, it was very difficult to organize them. So we have really very large first-year classes, especially for maths. There's about almost 500 students that do first-year maths, and they're taught in 4 different sections. And as well as that, you know, Glasgow University has this thing about doing 3 subjects in first year. So within reason, you can really do anything. And so you can have any combination of subjects. And if you throw in all the lectures, tutorials, labs, and all sorts of things, there's no kind of standard timetable. So trying to find a time that suits most people was really, really difficult. And then you throw in problems like room bookings and stuff. It was starting to get quite impossible. So she was trying to book up rooms and paying senior students to be facilitators, and a small number of people would turn up. And on top of that, she'd get lots of emails saying, I really want you to go to this, but I can't at these times. So it was really quite hard work trying to implement this. So she and I were talking about it and decided, you know, there should be something else that we could do. And then the maths department didn't want to pay all this money out for a very small number of students attending these sessions. So we thought we would experiment with some virtual PAL. So the reasoning being that you're probably better having some online interaction rather than have no interaction at all. So, you know, there was a question about what platform are we using. The University VLE is Moodle. But students don't really like using Moodle that much. The forums were always untouched, and it's a clunky thing to use. It's not very accessible on a smartphone. And the thing with Facebook is that everybody's already on Facebook, and students always seem to be logged on. The University of Glasgow runs a digital native survey, and all first-year students are surveyed every other year. So these are the results from the 2011 survey. And Facebook use is just, everybody has that. It's sometimes actually surprising that when people don't use it. I think that was a phone, wasn't it? Okay, right. So we decided to go with Facebook, and we thought, all right, we'll experiment and see how it works. So we decided to use closed groups. Closed groups are really good because you don't have to be friends with people to belong to the same group. And a lot of people worry about using Facebook with students because they think they have to be friends with them. But what we do is we invite students to join the Facebook group by, well, we set up the group and send them a link to it. And anyone can really join it. But, you know, people who are not in the closed group can't actually see any of the posts there. So it's relatively private. Okay, so yeah, and we decided that we're going to set these up, and it was Lorna and myself who were moderating them, and none of the academic staff had any input into this. So we thought that if your lecturers and people who are assessing your work and stuff are out of the group, then people will be more forthcoming with asking questions and you know, being a bit more open, really. And then because we were going for a peer-assisted learning model, we recruited senior students too. Well, we asked people if they wanted to join, and loads of them were really enthusiastic, and they all did. Right. So the benefits that we found is that there was lots of academic and social interaction. It was a good place to share resources. So sometimes I would point out things. I would link to stuff, and other times students would say that I looked at this video on YouTube and it was really good, or I found this university has a really good website for blah or blah and it's really good. So anyway, so sharing resources is really handy. The other thing is it's always there. So during the holidays and evenings, outside of term time, you know, it's always available. And people do use them all the time. If you're working on something and you're stuck with it, you can ask a question straight away. You don't have to wait for next week's peer-assisted learning session or a tutorial. And the other thing is, if you're working on something at the moment, but you see some threads there and you go, yeah, actually I haven't started on that, but I'll come back to this later because I'm not finished with this bit. And the threads are always there. So people always go back and they can look at it later on. So that aspect of it was really, really useful. And there are plenty of students who are very, very shy, who don't like to speak up in class or in front of others. And they find it's a good place where they can actually say stuff without, feeling intimidated. And there are always some people in class who are very, they're dominating, I guess. They take over or they talk a lot. And so, there's less of that happening in the Facebook group. And also another useful thing was, if English isn't your first language, it gives you time to kind of think about how you can formulate a question or an answer without feeling under pressure to say something straight away. And what I found extremely interesting is the clear articulation. So you'll notice that when you're speaking to students, they kind of wave their arms about a lot and they'll jab at things on their notes and say, this thingy over here. And then they'll say, use really imprecise language, and they won't ask you questions in a, very accurate way maybe, and then you have to kind of, prod a little bit before they're able to come out and tell you what it is that they're stuck with. If they do that on Facebook, if their question isn't understandable by others, then no one's going to reply. So they have to think really carefully about how they phrase things. I had a student in a drop-in session who said to me, because I'm psychic, he just waves this worksheet and says, in question 6, do you do that? And I said, well, you can do that, but it may not solve the question. But does anybody want to guess what that means? What this could possibly be code for in maths? Nope. Nope.
Play the piano.
That's what I thought it was. It actually apparently meant Simpson's rule. It's shocking that I didn't get it straight away. So there we go. But you can't do that on Facebook. You have to speak properly. You have to use the right terminology. That I found was really, really good. So moving on from that then, because it was quite successful, at the end of the year, we decided we would leave the group as it was, but we renamed it. So it was originally called, something like SLS Level 1 Maths 11-12. So we changed it to Level 2 Maths 12-13, and we made brand new groups for the first years that came in. And in the second year of running this, we decided we would introduce 2 more groups. So I was very keen to have one for engineering because I see a lot of engineering students. And Lorna had been talking to one of the lecturers in physics about stuff. And they chatted about the Facebook groups, and he said, "Oh, you should try one out with physics as well." So we did that. And because we'd been doing this for 1 year, we weren't actually nervous about doing these. The reason we started with computing and maths is because I'm the maths person, Lorna is a computer scientist. So we felt that we would be able to answer questions. But because there's lots of senior students there, they all answer questions, and people just talk to each other. So, we don't have to have a lot of input. And so we felt that we can do the physics and the engineering because, she and I didn't have to answer all the questions. The others could do it. So it is supposed to be peer-assisted learning. And eventually, we've, over the years, introduced more and more groups for all the schools in the College of Science and Engineering. I should have probably mentioned at the beginning that the University of Glasgow has got 4 colleges. So the bulk of my work is done in science and engineering, and Lorna was the retention officer for science and engineering. So we don't really do any of it for the other colleges, it's just for this one. Okay, so here's some examples of conversations. So that question, this is during exam time, and this is really just last month in April. So, someone's posted a question. It's very good, that no one ever actually posts a question and says, can you give me an answer to this? Nobody ever says that. They always sort of put in some form of working like that guy's done. He said, I can get up to this point, and then after that, I don't know what to do. And then, here are some, I can't actually, here's a cursor. Here are some of the responses from other students saying, this is what you would need to do next, right? And that's the first person who asks a question at the end who said cheers. Sometimes they'll say things like, here's a question, I really don't know what to do with it. And then people actually give them hints, but no one ever just gives them an answer and moves on. So they do actually work together. This is another one. They have an online system this year. This was the first year that they did it, where they get given some questions that they have to hand in. It's a system called WebAssign. So this was a WebAssign question, and you often see things like that, where they've got something wrong, and then they post it on and say, what have I done? You know, I thought this was all okay. So this question actually said you had to write the complex number in polar form, and the students put in polar coordinates. And then somebody said, you need to write it r brackets cos x plus I sin x. And so this guy who'd posted the question said, oh, so polar form and polar coordinates aren't the same. You know, he hadn't known that. So, okay, he learned something. That was good. And at the end of that, when they've done all of their questions, there's a box that they have to tick to say it's all their own work. So this guy I thought this was really funny. He says, just woke up this morning to realize I never did the last question on WebAssign, the one with the declaration of originality. Is this a problem? So two people over there reassured him to say, no, it's okay. I forgot to do that once and it didn't matter. And the last guy says, oh yeah, it happened to a friend of mine. It started off as the odd question. Then he got into crime and left uni. Last time I heard he was in prison. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of messing about. It's really funny. So, you know, a bit of social interaction as well. So soon after we had started the Facebook groups, we did some feedback. We put up a questionnaire on Moodle and asked people to answer questions and to tell us what they thought of it and how they found it useful. And academically, you can see that the students found it really helpful. So what they do, they're saying that they find it really, if you look at the second one, the second comment there, they were saying that, you know, you feel less stupid because you can see that other people struggle with the same kinds of things. I like the comment after that, the second red one, which says it builds a sense of community and you learn people's faces and their names. So they do have really large classes. Each class has at least 100 students in it. So it's hard enough to get to know people in your own class, but when there's 500 doing the course, you know, this way they get to know each other quite well. And then they kind of sometimes realize that they're in the same physics lab or the same biology lab or something. And so it's quite nice that way. The top comment over there was really good. Because the student had pointed out that he said, in my experience as a student who travels in, it helps feel a part of the university. And it helps them feel a lot more engaged and less isolated. So reading that, you know, made us realize that we should really push this a little bit more. So what I do is I send out class emails quite regularly, you know, especially before sometimes there's a class test or something, and I will email out the class and say, if you need any help with revision, come and see me. So now I actually also include a link to the Facebook group and say, oh, and here's a group that you might want to join. And once I do that, there's always this little flurry of activity. Lots of people come in and join it. So that was the academic support side of things. And because this was working quite well, you know, we kind of thought we would kind of diversify slightly and think a little bit about student transition. So, you know, we get a very diverse range of students. Scottish qualifications are slightly different to English and Irish qualifications. You can do higher maths in 5th year. You can do advanced higher in 6th year. We get students come in with A-level maths. Sometimes they have further maths. And then, of course, all the other things like the widening participation, access courses, direct entry people, and all the international students. So, you know, coming to university is usually a big experience. It's a shock to the system at the beginning. You know, what takes them most by surprise, I think, is the speed at which material is covered in class. And sort of it takes them by surprise, I guess, a few weeks in that they've covered so much stuff, and sometimes they feel they've fallen behind because they hadn't realized quite how much they're supposed to do on their own. And there's also lots of other things to be getting used to, like, you know, they're probably away from home the first time. And Glasgow University seems to have an unbelievably large number of commuting students. We have about 40-ish% of students live within a 30-mile radius and commute in every day. And it's not unusual for people to commute in from Edinburgh as well every day. So if you're traveling back and forth so much, it sort of means that you're not maybe joining in all the university activities as much, and so you feel a little less part of the university. And also, again, I keep coming back to this 3-subject issue. We've got 3 subjects in first year, which means that quite often the pre-honours students don't feel that they have a sense of identity or belonging until they get into the honours part of the course, which is third year. So we thought it'd be quite nice to have an entrance group. So what we did is that we created an entrance group, and very handy having friends in admissions, because they sent out emails on our behalf to all the students who were about to start Glasgow University into the College of Science and Engineering. So kind of mid-August, when the results come out and the students have a confirmed place, we write out an email and give it to the person in admissions, and then they send it out on our behalf. And it goes out to everybody who's supposed to be coming in, and we invite them to join this group. And the point of this is to just kind of welcome them, and they can all start talking to each other and to senior students, and they speak to the Effective Learning Advisor, who was my colleague Lorna, but she doesn't work with us anymore. It's a new one for this year. And then Maths Advisor, who's me. And what they do is they use that group to ask questions, which could be related to the course, could be related to the university, or just to Glasgow generally, you know, if they're coming from somewhere else. The resources part is something that I've been really keen on pushing for a while. So in the time between when the results come out and they come to university, they're really, really keen. And if you tell them to do something, most of them will do it, right? So what I tend to do is I post resources there. So one thing is the Algebra Refresher from Maths Centre. And I always say, have a look at it and make sure you can do all of these things. You know, some people take a year out. In any case, they've all had a long summer off, and they forget things. They forget how to rearrange equations. They forget how to solve a quadratic and things like that, and just refresh your mind. And they're so keen at that time that they do actually go away and do it. And then they're also told that, you know, if there's anything you can do, you don't have to worry about it. You just come and see me when you arrive, and it's no problem. And the other thing is all the first year maths students have to do what's called a skills test, which is part of the maths course. So I just post a sample test online, and then they have a go at that as well. And all of that material is based on higher maths, which they should all have done. So it's really just to jumpstart the brain before they arrive. So at the very top of the Facebook group, you can pin posts, which means that it just stays at the top. It doesn't move down when other people start posting things. And into that, we post links to all the subject-specific groups. So they all join the entrance group, and then they can pick out whichever subject's relevant to them and join those groups as well. Okay, so that's the kind of thing they talk about on the entrance group. So that was quite good. Somebody was looking for somewhere to stay, and someone replied to them and said, you know, you can message me and there's a room going where I live. SAS payments is the funding that they get. Scottish students get a special, you know, you get off fees paid and all that. So they were all, you know, kind of things that concern them all. This is, you know, picking subjects out, and I kind of, Kieran's waved to me, so I feel obliged to rush through these very quickly now. But we've got an online enrollment system which breaks every year without fail. And we all know that, and we just sigh and roll our eyes. But the new students don't know that, and they stress about it. And so, you know, there's all this comes up on the entrance group all the time. So, you know, you can reassure them and say, don't worry, it's broken. Come back in 2 days, it'll be fine. And then they talk to senior students. They ask them things like, you know, oh, once I've gone to these lectures, is it possible to change my lecture slots? And the other thing that's really quite sweet is they say things like, I've got lectures at 10, 11 and 12. Can I get from one place to another on time without being late? You know, they worry about these things before they arrive. 1 week later, they're entirely shameless and don't care, but it's quite sweet at the time, you know. So yeah, and the other thing I use is Facebook events. So I set up maths films afternoons 2 years ago and a maths games group this year. So what I do is I create an event for it and post it on the Facebook group, and that's kind of what it looks like. So we'd watched for a maths room once, and people can RSVP, and we asked them to do that because then we know how much popcorn to get. And a student took a picture of all the popcorn and posted it on the event, which was quite nice. And I don't know if you've seen for a maths room, but it's like if you get a question wrong, then all the walls start closing in on these people and it'll eventually crush you. So that's a student was saying stuff about, I spent so long trying to figure out how these things would work. That's quite funny. And here's one for games group. I feel like I should actually rush on ahead a little bit. Okay. This year was the first, this year we surveyed our current fourth years in maths and computing because they were the first ever cohort where the Facebook groups were formally introduced. So I thought that the response rate was quite low, but my co-administrator on the group, Sarah, tells me that that's actually quite good numbers for an online survey. And so we were asking students about their experiences over the entire 4 years because they've done their entire course and had a Facebook group for it. And so we found it was quite interesting. Most students joined in the first year. And it still amazes me that they joined the group. They didn't join a group because they didn't know about it. How can you not know 4 years on? But, they didn't. But they generally found the groups very, very useful academically. And the top 2 comments over there relate to the maths groups, and the lower 2 are for the computing groups. So both sets of people were saying about it's quite good to see how other people approach problems, which is quite interesting. And I really particularly like the last comment about it was good that I didn't become cluttered with trivia and non-group stuff. Other than that, I think I'll stop and see if anybody wants to ask any questions.